Okay guys, this next set of notes is going to take a little while, and I'm going to try to move quickly with you. So to start with, we'll talk about sex-linked traits and what that means, and we'll give a few examples. So we talked about how we have chromosomes that code for different things. Well, we have chromosomes that also determine gender, and that is the chromosome pair number 23. These are called the sex chromosomes. The sex chromosomes are going to carry genes that are specific to the gender. So if it's specific to the male or the female, that type of trait is going to be carried on chromosome 23. They also carry genes that determine other traits for the individual. So to figure out if it's a boy or a girl, we talked about how females have eggs and they only carry the X chromosome, right? So that's all females can offer. Some of the males' sperm carry the X as well, but some of their sperm carry Y too. So it's technically the male who determines the gender of the baby. So if you have an egg that fertilizes with a sperm that's carrying an X, then you are going to have a girl because it gets X from mom, X from dad to give you a female, right? But if you have an egg from mom carrying the X, of course, and then the sperm from dad carrying the Y, then mom offers the X, dad offers the Y, and that gives you a male, okay? So once again, the dad is the one that determines the gender of the baby. So when we have these X and Y chromosomes from mom and dad, there are specific genes that are found on these chromosomes, and they're called sex-linked genes because their alleles are passed from parent to child on the sex chromosome. So most of the traits that we have that are on the X and Y chromosome, they're controlled by sex-linked genes, and they're called sex-linked traits. If we have a specific trait that affects mainly males, it's typically a sex-linked trait carried on the sex chromosome. So why does sex-linked traits happen? Why does this occur? The X chromosome from the mother is bigger than the Y chromosome from the father. Okay? So when you have your X chromosome, you'll see here, outlined in blue, or that light green color, there's the X chromosome. And then your Y is on top of it, right there. But it leaves this whole area that's in the circle right here where the genes don't have a match. There's extra space on the X that doesn't pair up with the Y. So your X chromosome from mom is bigger and carries and codes for more traits than the Y does. Okay? So keep in mind, mom is X and dad is Y. So when the X and Y pair up, it looks like this visual here showing you all this empty space where the X chromosome is coding for stuff and the Y is not. One sex-linked trait that we're going to talk about is red-green color blindness. So if you actually have red-green color blindness, then you cannot distinguish between the differences of color between red and green. Now recall that females have two X's, so XX is the female genotype, and males have an X and a Y. So, if you have a sex-linked trait that is carried on the X, males are most likely to get that trait. And it's because it doesn't have another X to counteract it with the dominant and recessive thing. With the females here, if they get that sex-linked trait and it's a recessive X, guess what? If they're still carrying a dominant X, it doesn't matter. That sex-linked trait's not going to show up, so it's not going to affect the females. But if it's carried on the X and that male gets one of the X's, he automatically gets that sex-linked trait because he doesn't have another X to counteract it. He only has a Y. So, unlike most chromosome pairs, the X and Y chromosomes have different genes on them. Okay? Most of the time chromosome pairs code for the same genes, but X and Y are different. Most of the genes on the X chromosome are not actually on the Y chromosome. Therefore, an allele on the X chromosome may not have a corresponding allele that matches up with it on the Y chromosome. Now, because males only have one X chromosome, like I just told you on the last slide, males are more likely than females to have a sex-linked trait that's controlled by a recessive allele. So I'm going to show you again. If this little X right here is the one carrying the recessive allele that's causing this problem, well, guess what? If the female has a capital X, it's still good. It's not getting it, right? But if that little X is given to the male, he doesn't have this dominant X to counteract it, so the male is going to get that trait. Okay? So this talks about color blindness, and it shows you a nice little pretty picture here. The top one is normal vision, and the bottom one is what it would look like from the eyes of someone who actually had red-green color blindness. Okay? So you see that the barn and the hills are no longer like the vibrant green and red color. Instead, it's all just kind of like a dull golden yellow color. So specifically, color blindness is a trait that's controlled by a recessive allele that's carried on the X chromosome. Now, because it's recessive and on the X chromosome, females can have a capital to counteract it, so they're less likely to get it. However, if that gets sent to a male, they don't have that X, they have a Y, so more males are likely to have red-green color blindness, okay? Now, the mom here, notice, can be a carrier. She's still a carrier. She doesn't have it, though. It doesn't show up. So the only way that it's going to show up is if it's passed on where it does not have a capital X to counteract it, like in the case of the male here. And remember that a carrier is a person who carries one of each. So it has a recessive allele and a dominant allele. So big T, little t, that's a carrier. So look at this picture and see if you can pick out numbers in each picture. If you stare closely at it, you should be able to pick out different numbers. So let's look at the next slide. This gives you the key of what you should be able to see. On the top of the last slide, you should have been able to see 25, 29, and 45. The bottom shows 56, 6, and 8. If you actually had color blindness, you could see the 25 in the top row, but the next two numbers would just be spots to you. In the bottom row as well, you could see 56, but the next two ones would just be spots. You couldn't read the numbers. Alright, so for selective breeding, this is the next topic we're going to get into. Selective breeding is whenever you are selecting desirable traits and you're using the organism with those desirable traits to produce offspring to get those same traits. So remember when we talked about purebred and we talked about how people breed horses to be fast, and so they want a purebred line to get that desirable trait. Well, selective breeding is like finding a desirable trait and using that organism with the trait to keep reproducing it so that you can get that same trait again. It says, think about the article you read in Language Arts about choosing gender and specific traits for their children. This is an example of selective breeding. You guys did not do this in your Language Arts class. But if you think about that in the broad sense, if you are married and you are trying to choose the gender of your child, you're trying to give your child specific traits, you're trying to selectively breed your child is what it was talking about. So this little graphic shows you how man has changed the traits of organisms through selective breeding. So let's start at the top with cats. It says cats which are small and not aggressive. So before, cats were much larger. They were not your normal house pet, and they were not very nice. Now cats have been breeded to, be smaller and be less aggressive towards adults. Dogs have been bred to be more friendly. You have horses that have been bred for speed. Cows have been selectively bred to produce more milk. Okay? So this slide says, if you wish to breed the prettiest guppies, how would you do it? And it talks about by only selecting the most beautiful, most colorful guppies, and those with the biggest, fluffiest, longest tail, then you'd breed them from generation after generation, and you would end up with something that looks like this guy, which is a guppy that's been selectively bred. Okay? Which makes a big difference compared to these little wild guppies. Over time, when you're selectively breeding for traits, you're going to get exactly what you want. Talking about dog breeders have been selectively breeding animals for desirable traits for centuries. And it shows here starting off with the wolf and ending up with the bulldog, the collie, and the Dachshund. Farmers have also cultivated many popular vegetables from just wild mustard. And it's by artificially selecting for certain attributes. So you have wild mustard, and then it shows it breaking off into other different crops. So cauliflower shows sterility of flowers. Broccoli shows the suppression of flower development. Cabbage, suppression of intermode length. Kale, enlargement of leaves to make those leaves larger and fuller. And the last one is to enhance the lateral meristem, so to make them longer. Okay, so all of this is done from one wild mustard and then selectively breeding for specific attributes. Selective breeding, you have nature as part of it, of course, because nature provides variation. And it's the humans that select the variations of the genes that are useful and most beneficial to us. Okay, we selectively breed for what we want, what we like. So, for example, a farmer breeds only his best livestock. If he has a cow that's not producing milk, he's not going to want to breed that cow because there's a chance that that trait's going to get passed on, and we don't want that. We want a cow that's going to produce lots of milk and be lucrative and make money, right? So, you're only going to breed the best organism or the best animal to get the best traits. In essence, when humans selectively breed organisms for certain traits, you're selecting specific genes that you're wanting to be passed on. So when we look at genes and the inheritance of specific genes and traits, you also have to look at the effect the environment has on you. Because yes, we are who we are because of the traits that we have, but the environment also plays a large role. The effects of genes are often influenced by the environment, so where the organism grew up, what its surroundings are, things like that. Many of our characteristics are determined by the interaction that our genes have with the environment. So, yes, we have DNA that makes us a specific way, but our environment also molds us. So here are some examples for you, the first being athletic ability. So of course, some athletic ability may be genetic, right? If your dad's good at basketball, you might be good at basketball because of those genes. But you can also be good at basketball because you work hard and you're dedicated to working on your skills, right? So just because mom's good at volleyball doesn't mean you're going to be good at volleyball. You might have to still work hard and be dedicated, okay? The next one is height. Height can be affected, of course, by genetics. You get your height from mom and dad. But also you can do things that affect your height. So environmental factors affect it. What you eat. If you're not getting enough nutrition to grow, that could be a problem. Smoking will affect your height. Damage to a growth plate. So if you are playing a sport and you damage a growth plate when you're younger, that can cause you to be shorter than what you're supposed to be. If you have a large amount of caffeine that you take in at a young age, that can stunt your growth as well. The next trait is cancer. Cancer, they're looking into, yes, of course, being genetic, but we know from learning about the atmosphere that when you're exposed to harmful UV rays, that can give you cancer as well. And the UV rays come from the sun. So cancer is genetic and environmental. Your singing ability could be genetic, environmental. Same as athletics. You can get that trait from mom and dad, but what if mom and dad can't sing, but you can? You probably worked really hard, you were dedicated, you were interested in it, so you took time with it, okay? Singing lessons with some natural ability will get you there. Some other examples are diet. Diet plays a big role in determining many factors that have an effect on our genetics, such as obesity, are you overweight? Cholesterol, which can clog your arteries. Heart disease, right? Diet impacts all of these things. And there are other environmental factors such as alcohol and drug use that can affect a person's genetics as well. So the next section I'm going to jump into really quick covers genetic disorders, the karyotypes, and pedigrees. And you can see in this cool picture right here, it shows you all of the pairs of chromosomes, 1 through 22, and then it has your the X and the Y chromosome for the 23rd pair. Alright, so a genetic disorder is defined as an abnormal condition that you inherit through genes or chromosomes, okay? So you can inherit these through genes or from an extra copy of a chromosome during meiosis or something. Some genetic disorders are caused by mutations in the DNA. DNA pairs up based on specific bases. So there are 4 bases: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, which I abbreviate by their first letter. They only bond with specific ones. So adenine only bonds with thymine. Guanine only bonds with cytosine. If the DNA gets messed up and there's a mutation, and instead of G bonding with C, G bonds with T, that's a problem. That's a mutation, okay? That's going to cause a genetic disorder. Other genetic disorders are caused by changes in the overall structure of the DNA. So you see in the picture here, it shows the original, and it shows green matching with purple, green matching with purple. That's correct. And red and yellow, red and yellow. But when you look at this one, you have your green and purple. Our purple matched with yellow that time. So that's considered a mutant copy. That's a mutation. The first genetic disorder we're going to talk about is cystic fibrosis. This is a genetic disorder where your body is producing really thick mucus, and it fills up in your lungs and your chest and your intestines, and it's really hard to cough out. So like when you have a cold, you can easily cough or blow your nose and get most of the mucus out of you. But cystic fibrosis causes your mucus to be super thick, and it kind of compacts inside your body and stays there. That mucus then fills your lungs, which makes it hard to breathe. And as far as getting cystic fibrosis, it is caused by a recessive allele on one chromosome that's a result of a mutation in which 3 base pairs are removed from the DNA molecule. So if you look in the picture here, it says cystic fibrosis is a hereditary disorder characterized by lung congestion and infection and malabsorption of nutrients in the pancreas. Okay, so you can kind of see right in this area where it highlights here that there is a lot of things compacted inside those airways that are making it hard for that person to breathe. The next genetic disorder is called sickle cell disease or sickle cell anemia. This affects your hemoglobin, which is protein in blood that carries oxygen. Okay, very important role. It carries oxygen in our blood's supply. So with sickle cell disease, it pretty much is when you have weird shaped red blood cells. So if you look in the picture here, I'm going to circle. Normal red blood cells are circular, right? They look like little discs. But sickle-celled red blood cells have a sickle shape or a crescent shape, like a crescent moon, okay? And what they do is they can lodge inside of our blood vessels and clog it up, all right? So when that happens and it clogs up the blood vessels, it does not allow oxygen to move like it should. And it causes problems, and it can be painful. So, for this trait, the allele is actually codominant with a normal allele, so one is not dominant over the other. So, a person with 2 sickle-shaped alleles is definitely going to have the disease. However, if you have one that is dominant, and then one dominant saying that you don't have it, and one dominant saying that you do have it because it's codominant, then that person is going to produce both. So they'll have normal red blood cells and sickle-shaped red blood cells. So it'll be a combination of the two. These people typically don't have symptoms of sickle cell disease because there's not enough sickle-shaped cells to cause much damage. The next genetic disorder is hemophilia. This is when your blood does not clot like it should. So when we get cut, our skin, our blood clots, and then we scab over, right? Well, people with hemophilia, they're missing that protein that clots their blood, so their blood doesn't clot quickly enough. So if they get cut or bruised, then they can technically bleed out or have bad internal bleeding, okay? Because their blood's not clotting. So it either goes out of the body or builds up inside of the body. So you'll see here where I wrote small bumps and bruises may cause internal bleeding that can't be controlled. That's because the blood's not clotting to stop. It is caused by a recessive allele on the X chromosome. So because it's on the X chromosome, the male is most likely to get it. And this is a really good picture to show you. Dad is XY, mom is XX, and she's a carrier. So she's carrying that trait for hemophilia. But because she doesn't have two, she doesn't have it. She's just a carrier. So mom and dad have kids, all right? Dad offers the Y. Mom offers the infected X. This kid gets it. Didn't have a shot, right? So then they have a little girl. Dad offers X. Mom offers the infected X to this little girl, but it doesn't show up as much because you have the dominant trait. Now, she's affected because she's a carrier, but it does not show up inside of her, okay? Now, these two kids over here turned out to be unaffected because mom gave that X to those kids, all right? So they don't carry it and they don't have it. Down syndrome is a genetic disorder where you have an extra copy of chromosome number 21. So if you look in the picture here, it shows you chromosome 18, 19, 20, and 21, what it would look like normal. And then it shows you where it made an extra copy of 21, which creates Down syndrome. This occurs during meiosis whenever your chromosomes are copying and separating. Whenever they pull apart and separate, they fail to separate properly, and that can cause that extra copy of chromosome 21. People with Down syndrome can have some degree of mental retardation. I mean, sometimes it's very little, sometimes it's more severe. Heart defects are also pretty common, but they can be treated. This is not something that is ruining your life, like you can't have everyday functions. People with Down syndrome can still have a job after school and high school and all that stuff, so they can live normal lives. So if you have a genetic disorder, there are ways to go about managing that genetic disorder. Doctors will use Punnett squares and pedigree charts to predict genetic disorders. But now they also have more advanced tools like karyotypes to help diagnose genetic disorders. And people that end up with genetic disorders can be helped through medical care. There are programs, there's education, job training, all kinds of stuff that can help them have a normal life. We talked about how doctors can now use something called karyotypes to help figure out if a specific disorder is being passed on. And what a karyotype is it's a picture of all of your chromosomes in a cell. All right? They're arranged in pairs because you get one from mom, one from dad. And it can reveal whether a person has the correct number of chromosomes. So the karyotype in this specific cell shows that organism would be normal because there's not an extra copy of any chromosomes and there are no chromosomes that are missing. There's something that is actually used whenever you are deciding to have children. You can go through genetic counseling to help couples understand their chances of having a child with a specific genetic disorder and how you could possibly carry that on. And a couple with a family history of a genetic disorder can go there for advice, not only to see how the likelihood of passing it on would be, but also on how to cope with the fact that if you did pass that on to your child. So in the picture here you see the dad, who's a carrier, and the mom, who's a carrier. And then it shows that dad gave the affected trait to this kid and this kid. And mom gave hers to this kid and this kid. So this little baby ended up with the trait. It was affected. These two were just carriers, so that specific disorder did not show up in them. And this baby is not a carrier, nor did it show up. So if you have a genetic disorder, ways to deal with it are, of course, medical treatments. So there are things in the medical field that can help people with some disorders. For example, physical therapy helps someone with cystic fibrosis move their mucus from their lungs and getting it out of their body and hacking it up. Now, it's something that takes a while, but it does work. Taking folic acid helps people with the sickle cell disease make more red blood cells so that there are less crescent-shaped cells. And then education and job training helps people with Down syndrome find work in a variety of places of employment so that they can live a normal life as well. All right, that's all I got for you guys. If you have any questions, please see me in class.